questions are being raised after new documents show Jeffrey Epstein traveled to Canada in 2014. That visit happened nearly 6 years after he was convicted for soliciting prostitution from a minor. Now, that's a criminal charge that should have prevented him from entering Canada. CBC's Mike Crawley is following this for us and joins me from Washington. Mike, lots of interest in this story. In fact, it's one of the most read stories on our website that you wrote late last night. How did we learn about Epstein's travel to Canada?
So, Deanna, this came out in that slew of more than 3 million pages of documents that were released by the U.S. Department of Justice on Friday. We were able to piece together various bits of evidence showing that Epstein traveled to Vancouver for 3 days in March of 2014. Now, this comes from a travel itinerary that was in the Epstein files, an email in which Epstein said he was in Vancouver. There was even a booking for a massage at the Four Seasons Hotel in Vancouver. And if you take a look at this document, this is a U.S. Customs and Border Protection document that shows that Jeffrey Epstein arrived in Seattle on a flight from Vancouver on a date that lines up with that travel itinerary. But what we don't know, Deanna, is why he was allowed into the country. We know that he shouldn't have been because of another document that's in the file. So if you take a look at this, it's a letter from the Canadian consulate in Los Angeles. It's 4 years later, but it's telling Jeffrey Epstein that he is inadmissible to Canada for reasons of criminal conviction. Epstein had applied for an exemption to allow him to travel to Vancouver despite that criminal record. And what this letter does is it rejects the application. So, you add these two things up and it's unclear really why he was permitted to come to Canada in 2014 when in 2018 his record was no different and he was refused.
Absolutely. And you reached out to federal officials, Mike. What did they say?
Yeah, so we started by asking immigration officials whether Epstein had been granted one of those temporary exemptions in 2014, like he applied for in 2018. They referred our questions to the Canada Border Services Agency and the CBSA. Well, they didn't directly address our question of why was Jeffrey Epstein allowed in 2014. They said they can't comment on specific cases because it's considered personal information protected by Canada's Privacy Act. Here's the statement, more of the statement, at least that the Canada Border Services Agency gave us. They said admissibility of travelers is decided on a case-by-case basis, and it's based on the information available at the time of entry. Upon arrival of a Canadian port of entry, travelers must demonstrate to a CBSA officer that they meet the requirements for entry into Canada. But Deanna, that really just raises more questions about why was Epstein allowed in? Was the CBSA not aware that he'd been convicted? Did they just accept his being there holding a U.S. passport as meeting the requirements for entry into Canada? We really don't know. So I also contacted the man who was Canada's Minister of Immigration and Citizenship at the time. That's Chris Alexander. And he sent me a statement saying he had no knowledge of Epstein's visit in 2014. Chris Alexander went on to say, quote, if he did come to Canada at that time, that was a very serious lapse in immigration enforcement. Our government's position was very clearly that any persons, including U.S. citizens with criminal records, were inadmissible and that these provisions of the law should be rigorously enforced. So, look, we're really now no clearer yet why Jeffrey Epstein was let into Canada. But we are, Deanna, going to keep looking for answers.
Asking such important questions there and a really interesting Canadian take on this huge story. Thanks so much for that, Mike. That's CBC's Mike Crawley in Washington.